Part 50. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 491. Steamed Stuffed Bun. Candied Halu. The next morning, the sky was still dark, but the heavy snowfall overnight had temporarily stopped. There are more and more people walking in the market outside the inn, vendors and footmen are walking back and forth, the food stalls are steaming, and the mist makes the long street look foggy in winter. The smell of meat buns drifted in from the window. Zhu Manzi shrugged his nose. Maybe he was hungry. He opened his eyes, which were sleepy. He took a moment to relax before waking up. Turning his head to look, Ningyu he was lying on his side with her back, exposing his snow-white shoulders. The tether of his belly band was hidden under his long hair, making him look quite soft. Huh. Zhu Manzi blinked his big eyes, propped up his upper body on his elbows, and looked over, Ning, aren't you too cold? Why did you take off your clothes again? Ningyu he had woken up early and had painted the palace sand, so he didn't have to worry about being discovered. At this time, he sat up confidently and put on his skirt generously. It was a bit hot after sleeping in the middle of the night. How did you sleep last night? Zhu Manzi rubbed his shoulders and said with a smile, it's good, just in the middle of the night, I seemed to hear Sister Daning humming, as if she was crying, and even started to rub me. Well, maybe let's dream. After saying this, Zhu Manzi's eyes were slightly confused, he looked down and held them in his hands. Ningyu he's face looked slightly unnatural, and he did not dare to talk more about this topic. He chuckled and said, last night was calm, nothing happened. It must be a dream, let's go down and eat. Oh. After a while, the two of them finished washing and went downstairs to the lobby of the inn together. Su Buring and Nightingale had already gotten up and were whispering together. There were buns and snacks on the table, as well as 4 pairs of chopsticks. There were a lot of people in the lobby, all sitting together in small groups, chatting about trivial matters. Ningyu he walked to the table and sat down, assuming the posture of an elder. Without looking at Su Buling, he raised his hand and filled a bowl of porridge for Manzi, and then started eating by himself. Zhu Manzi has always been in good spirits. As long as he is with others, he never stops talking. At this time, he looked at the Nightingale strangely and joked. Little girl, how did you sleep last night? If I sleep in the same room as your young master, I must sleep on the bench, right? Nightingale sat upright, and there was no trace of embarrassment in her spirited eyes. I am a personal maid, so I naturally sleep with the young master. How can I sleep on the bench? Zhu Manzi was stunned, frowned, and looked at Su Buling with some confusion. Su Buling picked up his chopsticks and said, eat, don't talk about these messy things. Zhu Manzi felt something was wrong, and the bun in his hand suddenly lost its aroma, and whispered, Mr. Su, she is so shameless, it doesn't matter what she wants. Su Buling's eyes were calm, he shook his head and said, Manzi, you still don't believe me. That's right. Zhu Manzi also felt that Su Buling would not attack the little Nightingale who had only a few ounces of meat, so he felt relieved and ignored the Nightingale. The 4 of them were eating breakfast. The original plan was to go out later and look for clues near Tang's house. But halfway through the meal, the conversation between several Jianghu people attracted the attention of the people in the inn. Yuela Inn is a place to buy news. Most of the Jianghu people who come here to stay are from all over the world. There was a table of guests near the door. They were 3 men. They were very tired. They must have arrived here in the morning. At this time, they were eating meat buns and talking. I'm afraid something big is going to happen in Shentangyu. People from Yankai Villa are out in force, and the owner of the village, Yan Hanli, is personally taking action. This kind of big thing happened in the Jianghu world, and it was considered a secret that had to be told. The 3 men had quite loud voices, but they actually wanted to show off in front of other Jianghu people. When they heard that the Yankai villa, whose status was second only to the Tang family, came out, everyone who was eating in the inn became interested. They put down their chopsticks and turned their heads to listen. Even the owner of the Yuela Inn came out and brought a pot of tea. Put it on the table and asked with a smile. "Is there still this matter?" The man who was the leader among the three said enthusiastically, "At that time, the three of us were walking near Shentangyu, and we happened to encounter people from Yankai Villa passing by on the road. They were all masters. The leader was Yan Hanli from Yankai Villa. I was lucky enough to meet him once before, and I will never admit my mistake. Yankai Villa has been keeping a low profile in recent years. What are we going to do with so many people coming out? I don't know. Anyway, the battle is quite big. It's impossible to go to Shentang Valley to enjoy the scenery." When everyone in the inn heard this, they were a little confused. Yankai Villa is a well-known force in the world. The owner of the village came out with all his masters. He could even fight Wu Kuei. Who was he trying to deal with? Everyone was puzzled and turned their attention to the well-informed shopkeeper. The shopkeeper frowned and recalled, then shook his head and said, "After Yan Hanli took over as the owner of the village, he acted in a low-key manner. I'm afraid he got so angry this time because of his past personal grudges. Zhuang Master Yan was said to be crazy when he was young, but the enemies that should be dealt with have been dealt with long ago. Who else can he deal with?" Su Buling listened to everyone chatting, but because Yankai Villa was not within the target range, he didn't pay attention. However, Ningyu he grew up in Yuzhou since childhood and knew the local forces relatively well. After recalling it for a while, he suddenly leaned next to Su Buling and whispered. Back then, Zhongli Jiju made trouble in Yuzhou and offended Yan Hanli. It seems that Zhongli Jiju rejected Yan Hanli's pursuit, and Yan Hanli became angry and violent. However, Zhongli Jiju was very capable. At that time, he not only poisoned Yankai Villa, many people also publicized Yan Hanli's despicable behavior. This matter was quite a big deal at that time. It happened to be when I was walking around in Yuzhou, everyone was talking about it, and Yan Hanli hid for half a year. Liangtu. Do you think Zhongli Jiju is here too? Su Buling's face darkened slightly when he heard this. With Zhongli Jiju's temperament, it was not surprising at all to follow him. Don't be afraid of 10,000, just be afraid of the unexpected. As long as possible, you can't pretend you haven't seen it. How far is Shentangyu? Ningyu he thought for a while, it's 100 miles to the west, but there was an ambush yesterday, I'm afraid they will take action today. I'll go over and take a look. Su Buling didn't hesitate, got up and went out and whistled, and Chai Feng Ma jumped out of the stable and ran to the door of the inn. Your Majesty. Ningyu he wanted to go with him, but Su Buling got on his horse and rushed to the other end of the market in the blink of an eye. Nightingale stopped Ningyu he and said softly, chasing wind and snow, you have traveled thousands of miles in a day. Our horses can't catch up. A Yankai Villa can't help you, young master. Although Ningyu he was a little worried, their pony really couldn't catch up with Zui Feng Ta Shui. Time was tight and they couldn't delay, so they didn't stop Su Buling to delay. The horse neighed in the wind, its hooves trampled the snow, and the Mobei Horse King ran with all his strength. All that was left to the market passers-by was a black after-image. He turned around when he heard the horse bells ringing, and he had disappeared. At the official entrance of Huangkou town, the swordsman Ding Yuan, who had just arrived after a long journey, passed by Zui Feng Taxiu who rushed out of the town, and looked back with confusion. It's chasing the wind and treading the snow. The Holy Lord's white jade lion has a white tail, King Chu's iron rouge is red, and this black one seems to be Prince Su's horse. Chen Daizai stopped his horse and looked around. After a while, he asked, go to Bodhi Island first, or not? Ding Yuan thought about it for a moment, then turned his horse's head and followed him, Su Buling must have come here because of Bodhi Island. He hurried to the west. There must be something going on. No matter what it is, since we encounter it, we must first deal with it. Let's kick him out. Chen Daizai nodded, flicked the sleeves of his Taoist robe and said drive dash, and the two fast horses followed the footprints on the snow. Thank you to becoming a God 123 boss for the 50,000 reward. I attended a wedding today. In order to update on time, I didn't drink. I drank 2 bottles of apple juice. As a result, my stomach was so acidic that I might as well drink. 10,000 words update, please vote for me. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 492. Shentanyu is adjacent to Yankai Lake in the east and Qianchao Ancient Temple in the south. It is located between 2 mountains and is about 20 miles long. The Yankai River flows across the valley bottom, the stone waterfalls on the hillside are strangely shaped, and the clear water of Longtan is a place where rich and powerful people often build their houses as a summer resort. It's winter, the wind is cold, and it's not time to enjoy the scenery. There are few people inside and outside Shentang Valley, and the mountains and fields are covered with white snow. On the path along the river, Zhongli Jiju is walking with the big red horse. Knowing from the news dealer that Su Buling came to Shentangyu, Zhongli Jiju had doubts, but the white paper fan in the world could win the trust of all religions and 9 schools of thought because it would act according to the rules after taking money. Chang and the 4th Master Chen in the city could have a conflict with the Wolf Guard for the safety of his guests, let alone Lu Wu who has been rooted in Fanyang County for many years. But Zhongli followed the clues and came to Shentangyu. It was empty. There were no beautiful scenery and no tourists in winter. After asking along the way, the conclusions she got were ambiguous. Zhongli didn't know Su Buling's purpose of coming to Shentang Valley, so he could only continue walking into the valley. He wanted to see Longtan in the depths, where the scenery was the most beautiful. People who came to Shentang Valley would usually go there. Arriving at the entrance of Shentangyu, a roadside tea shop was open and the 2 tables under the awning were empty. There was only a young waiter sitting at the door with a brazier at his feet, rubbing his hands and looking around. After seeing Zhongli Jiju, the young man smiled a little and said, "Girl, why don't you sit down and have a rest? This year's Yuki and Longjing is not available anywhere else." Zhongli Jiju stopped talking about soliciting business, thought for a while, sat down at the tea stall table, and said with a smile, "Brother, has a man on horseback entered Shentangyu in the past 2 days? He is tall and tall. The horse is very handsome and should be accompanied by an entourage." The young waiter stood up, picked up the teapot, poured a bowl of tea and put it on the table. He nodded. "A few days ago, a person like this came over and he went straight in. I was in the shop at the time and didn't see how many people there were." Zhongli Jiju's eyes lit up and he asked softly, "Have you ever left?" The young man shook his head. "I didn't see him coming out. He didn't go out from the other end. He must have stayed at Tingquan Tower in Longtan. There are no guests in the winter, so Tingquan Tower is still open. If the girl is looking for someone, she can go there. Have a look." "Oh." Zhongli Jiju thought for a moment and asked, "What color is the horse that the man is riding?" The young waiter put down the teapot and thought about it for a moment. "I was boiling water in the shop when I heard a noise and glanced out of the window. It was getting dark and snowing, so I couldn't see clearly, but judging from my body shape, I looked like a desert. Snow riding horses from the north are rare here in Yuzhou, so I remember them." Zhongli Jiju felt a little weird in her heart, but she couldn't tell what was weird. Seeing that there was nothing wrong with the other party's description, she didn't ask any more questions and picked up the teacup to take a sip. After the young waiter finished speaking, he sat back at the door of the tea shop, warming his legs over the fire and shaking his legs without stopping to look at the guests. Zhongli Jiju drank a bowl of tea, rested for a while, and then got up and prepared to enter Shentangyu. But just as he put the copper plate on the table, the sound of horse hooves came from behind again, and the sound of horse bells jingling was heard. I knew it was a rare good horse. Zhongli Jiju was stunned for a moment, feeling that something sounded familiar. He turned around and saw a black dot rushing towards the end of the road where the cold wind was blowing across the residual snow at an alarming speed. The young master was hunting in the wind with his white robe, and a long robe hung on the side of the horse. While flying, a single person actually showed the pressure of a cavalry charge, which made people unconsciously think of avoiding the edge temporarily. Do you agree? Zhongli Jiju's eyes lit up, and he was about to secretly praise his skills as a news dealer, but he immediately felt something was wrong. Judging from the direction, Su Buling had clearly just come from outside. Thinking of this, Zhongli Jiju frowned and turned to look at the young man sitting outside the tea stall. When the young waiter saw the eye-catching Mobei horse in a blink of an eye, he knew that he was in luck. His expression stiffened slightly and he chuckled. Hey, when did this little guy come out? I really didn't notice. When Zhongli Jiju heard this, he was dubious. He walked out of the tea shop and waved his hand to say hello to Su Buling. Su Buling galloped for more than 100 miles in an hour, and his face was almost paralyzed by the cold wind. The explosive power and endurance of the wind-chasing horse under his crotch were among the best in the world, but he was still panting from exhaustion after running for hundreds of miles without rest. White mist is spraying from the mouth, and sweat is steaming on the horse's body. Sitting on the horse's back, you can hear the beating of the heart like a drum. If you run any longer, you will be exhausted. Seeing Zhongli Jiju's figure appearing in the distance, Su Buling secretly breathed a sigh of relief, and quickly let Chai Feng Ma trot to slow down, and did not stop until he reached Zhongli Jiju. Standing in front of the tall horse, Zhongli Jiju could feel the hot breath blowing against her face. The sweat mist rising from the horse was like smoke. It was obvious that the horse was rushing over with all its strength. She said, slightly puzzled. Su Bulenling, why are you running in such a hurry? Su Buling turned over and dismounted, raised his hand and wanted to slap Zhongli Jiju on the butt, but after thinking about it, he decided not to. Come here, hero, to save the beauty. You're the only one who's leaving. The world is almost being taken over by others and I don't even know. What are you doing in Shentangyu? Zhongli Jiju looked a little confused. Lu Wu from Fanyang County said you were in Shentangyu, the guy from the tea shop just now. After saying this, Zhongli Jiju finally realized something was wrong. She was sold. To lure her here, she must have been sold to Yankai Villa. Thinking of this, Zhongli Jiju became furious. In the past, the news dealers in the world were unruly and would end up killing the whole family. Unexpectedly, Lu Wu actually took the money to plot against her. Zhongli Jiju looked back at the tea shop. The young man at the door of the tea shop had already mounted his horse and galloped into the shrine, running 100 steps away. That's Yankai Villa's spy, don't let him go back and tell the truth. Su Buling frowned and raised his eyebrows. Not wanting to let the wind-chasing horse sprint with all its strength, he took off the long dragon-marked spear from the side of the horse, held it in his hand, trotted 2 steps, and threw it like a javelin. Rustle. The long branch broke through the wind and flew away like a sharp arrow, crossing 100 steps in the blink of an eye. The young man who heard the sound of breaking wind had no time to jump off his horse and rushed forward. He was nailed to a big tree beside the road by a long branch. He twitched a few times and then stopped moving. Zhongli Jiju just got on his horse, saw this scene, and got down again angrily, and came to Su Buling. Lu Wu must have sold my information to Yankai Villa. I have offended Yankai Villa before, and there may be an ambush inside. How did you know? Su Buling led the horse to the manger of the inn to drink water, and said casually, yesterday, people from Yankai Villa passed by on the road and were spotted by Jianghu. I heard them chatting in the morning. Master thought they might be here to surround you. I'll come over and take a look, be careful in the future. Zhongli Jiju was stunned for a moment. You're still not sure if it's me, so you came here in such a hurry. Su Buling turned his head and looked at Zhongli Jiju for a few times, and finally focused on the Minghong sword at his waist. You are the person I paid to hire, that is, my person. If you think it is possible, you will naturally come here just in case. It is better than if you die and there is no way to remedy it. When Zhongli Jiju heard this, he was silent for a moment, feeling a little touched. Like Zhongli Chuchu, she has no friends in the Jianghu of the Central Plains. Those who can rush to help in times of crisis can be regarded as life and death friends in the Jianghu. Zhongli Jiju smiled, crossed her chest and nodded. You are so loyal, I have made a commitment to be your friend. This time I owe you a favor, and I will give you a 50% discount on next month's monthly salary. Don't be ridiculous. The owner of Yankai Villa has brought dozens of people to surround you. I'm afraid they are lying in wait in the Shentang Valley. Tell me how you provoked those people back then. Can you kill me to help you settle it? Otherwise we can leave now to avoid causing trouble. Zhongli Jiju turned back and looked in the direction of Tang Yu, sighing quietly. Beauty is a disaster, how else can I provoke it? Sister, I was 15 or 16, in my prime, as pink as Choo Choo, cough, tender. Pink. Su Buling blinked his eyes and glanced at Zhongli Jiju's waist. Miss Jiju, there is no village or shop here. It's just the two of us. If you don't speak politely, I'll misunderstand what you mean. Son, don't blame me for not being a gentleman. Zhongli Jiju was just in a good mood and made a dirty joke. She was afraid that Su Buling would be offended, so she didn't dare to say any more nonsense. Just joking, anyway, I was very good looking back then, no worse than Ning Yuhi. I spent some time in Yuzhu, and there were a lot of attentive rangers following me, but don't think too much about it. Although I am a woman from southern Xinjiang, I have kept myself clean and have not seduced men. At that time, Yan Hanli, the young owner of Yankai Villa, met me at the edge of Longtan in Shentang Valley. He showed off his courtesy in various ways and showed off his family. Su Buring came to the tea stall, poured 2 cups of tea, sat down to rest, and listened to Zhongli Jiju's story. I didn't like Yan Hanli, so I didn't want to pay attention to him at that time, so I wanted to leave. But when he found out that I was from southern Xinjiang, helpless and had no background, he became evil-minded and served me food it was drugged. I grew up playing with drugs. When I noticed it, I pretended to be asleep and waited. Then Yan Hanli ran over and I caught him red-handed. Not only did Yan Hanli not admit his mistake, he became angry. They wanted to take me by force, but I drugged all the guards and ran away. I publicized this afterwards, and Yankai Villa still wanted to silence me. After Zhongli Jiju finished speaking, he sat down next to Su Buling and said seriously, Sister, although my reputation is not very good, I have never done anything harmful to nature. If not, Master Kingsu would not be so angry. Huzi glared but couldn't do anything to me. He had killed me long ago. The people I offended were the ones who provoked me in the first place. I just didn't follow their rules. Why should I have to take care of Yankai when Yan Hanli harms others? Is the reputation of the villa helping them cover up? If you think I'm being unforgiving, then I have nothing to say. Su Buling took a few sips of tea and nodded. I understand, let's go in and have a look. Zhongli Jiju hesitated for a moment, but thinking of Su Buling's skills, nothing could go wrong with her presence, so she did not refuse, got up and followed Su Buling into Shentangyu. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 493. The mountains are majestic, the water is as clear as a mirror, and the buildings are decorated with carved beams and painted buildings. The word Longtan is engraved on the big archway at the entrance of the wide long street. The market built by the lake is in the peak season in spring, autumn, and midsummer. There are no tourists in the cold winter. 80% of the shops are locked. In the few remaining shops, only the shop assistants are walking inside, and the street is empty. The bluestone long street is covered with a thin layer of snow. In the three-story Ting Quan Tower in the middle of the street, the atmosphere is quiet and solemn. More than 40 swordsmen in martial arts uniforms are sitting in the wing room on the second floor of Ting Quan Tower, waiting for the owner's order. In the hall on the first floor, Yan Hanli, dressed in gorgeous clothes, sits next to the tea table. Behind the pearl curtain, a singing girl plays the ancient song Shenrenkang. It is rumored that Shenrenkang is the song played by Emperor Yao when he offered sacrifices to the heaven, implying universal celebration. Sitting in a tea house and listening to the song on a cold winter day, one can get a glimpse of Yan Hanli's state of mind at this moment. On the tea table, a black jade backflow incense burner is lit, and snow-white smoke flows back from the top of the peak, layer by layer until it reaches the lake at the bottom of the mountain. Next to the incense burner is a long sword with a scabbard inlaid with gold threads. The shape of the long sword is very common, which is the Yanling sword in the hands of the Wolf Guard. The Yanling sword is a standard weapon of the court, also known as the official sword, which is a reward. Ordinary constables are not qualified to hold it, and people in the rivers and lakes dare not show off with official swords. The only one in the whole rivers and lakes who can use the Yanling sword is Yankai Villa, because this official sword was figured out by the ancestors of Yankai Villa. The Yanling sword is different from the ring-headed broadsword. It has a moderate weight, a straight blade, a curved tip, and a reverse blade. It is simple and easy to use. The official sword selected by the court has been passed down from the previous dynasty to the present. This is the most impressive thing about Yankai Villa. They are also experts in using this knife. Zhang Xiang from the detective department once came to ask for advice when he was traveling in Yuzhou. This kind of deeds cannot be compared with the head coach of spear soldiers in the world of Liuhemin. In terms of martial arts attainments, Yankai Villa cannot compare with the 28 chain knives of the Situ family, but in the martial arts world, it is already a major event that is famous all over the world. Since the Iron Eagle hunting deer, Yankai Villa has been very sensible and joined the Kui family, one of the 5 major families, and honestly helped the Kui family. They rarely move around in the martial arts world. It is the first time in recent years that they have come out in full force. For this reason, the second in command of Yankai Villa, who is also Yan Hanli's second uncle, sat across from the tea table, still hesitating. Hanli, things are not right in Yuzhou recently. According to the Kui family, Sword Saint Zulu came to Yuzhou, and Situ Yuejin was taken by the Kui family to prevent any accidents. The Tang family is also moving around, and I don't know who they invited from the capital to be the door god. It's easy to make trouble if we go out to do things at this time. Yan Hanli closed his eyes and concentrated, with a calm expression. We do some small things at the doorstep, no one will notice. That Ye Juniang, she spread the family scandal of my Kui family everywhere. Second uncle. Oh, alas, she was the first to be ignorant of good and evil. I am the young master of Yankai Villa, and I treat her with courtesy to give her face, but, Ye Juniang hasn't appeared in many years. I suspect that her coming to Yuzhou again is related to the current changes. It's inappropriate to act rashly without checking it out. Lu Wu's apprentice in Fanyang County is a good friend of mine. According to him, Zhongli Jiju just came to find someone, who seems to be a young rich man. Humph, even Kingxu Genren would look down on her character, and she would not have anything to do with the Zhu and Tang families. Alas! The second uncle couldn't persuade her any more after seeing this. After all, this knot had been buried in Yan Hanli for 10 years. Even if the woman disdained him, he still carried the stigma of Jianghu scum. Although no one scolded him publicly, his peers and elders in Yuzhu Jianghu looked at Yan Hanli with obvious disdain. Jianghu people travel the world for a name, either chivalrous or notorious. Yankai Villa has a family and a business, but it doesn't have a big backer like the Tang family, so it can only do a good job on the surface and stand on the side of the righteous. The existence of this stain has made Yan Hanli too embarrassed to call himself a knight so far, and he must find a way to whitewash it. The uncle and nephew waited in the lobby for an hour or so, until the sun was high in the sky, and the secret sentry on the street ran back and said respectfully, "Master, people are coming." Yan Hanli's whole body trembled slightly, and he opened his eyes, showing a bit of excitement and ruthlessness in his eyes, but at the signal of his second uncle's eyes, he still didn't get up and go out, but just sat by the tea table with a cold face and waited. Soon, the sound of tapping footsteps came from outside the Tinquan Tower. Zhongli Jiju, wearing a water blue long skirt, walked out of the gate. Under the warm winter sun, the skin looks white and crystal, like fresh and juicy water tofu. With a crescent smile in his fox-like eyes, he looked around the street, his red lips radiating a little bit of luster, and he looked like a lotus emerging from the water, bright and beautiful, adding a bit of spring color to the solemn and quiet long street in winter. Yan Hanli's eyes suddenly showed bloodshot, and he clenched his fists tightly, staring at the face he had longed for, and wanted to order him to be captured. However, with a sure victory, he was too eager to do so and fell into the trap. What he wanted was to get back all the humiliation he had suffered in the past, to see this once arrogant Miaozhong poisonous woman begging for mercy, and then obediently submit to him, explain to the outside world that it was all false accusations before, and wash away the stains on him. Outside the gate, Zhongli Jiju took a look at the signboard and entered Tinquan Tower without any defense. Seeing Yan Hanli and his nephew sitting in the hall, his face suddenly changed, and he covered his mouth in an exaggerated way, saying in horror, "Yan Hanli. Why are you here?" "Yes, that's it." Yan Hanli's arms trembled slightly due to excitement. He took a sip of the teacup and said in a suppressed voice, "I didn't expect you to still remember me. It's been a long time, Miss Jiju." Zhongli Jiju looked around and saw that there were only uncle and nephew in the hall. She seemed to be relieved, and showed a little arrogance like a little girl. She said politely, "What do you mean it's been a long time? I never thought I would see you again." "What? You come to block me? How dare you?" The second uncle of the Yan family slammed the table with a dignified look. Yan Hanli raised his hand to stop his uncle from scolding him, stood up, and looked coldly at Zhongli Jiju who was sitting in the lobby and pouring tea. "You are still so brave, do you think I fooled you once and I can fool you again?" Zhongli Jiju blinked, showing some nervousness, and looked around. "You also ambushed people?" "Papa." Yan Hanli clapped his hands, and in an instant, more than 40 swordsmen rushed out of the corridor on the second floor, holding their swords and looking at them covetously. Zhongli Jiju stood up in fear, took a few steps back and wanted to run, but the door was also blocked by several swordsmen. She curled her hands on her chest and said fearfully, What do you want to do? You have come to this day." Yan Hanli's face turned red, and she tried her best to suppress the excitement in her heart, but she still couldn't help it, revealing a slightly ferocious and unruly smile. "I'll give you a chance, first courtesy and then force. If you obey me honestly and explain to the outside world that it was just a fabrication and false accusation, I can still spare your life and give you a concubine status in the villa, otherwise." Zhongli Jiju heard this and shook her head. "I'm already married, don't be delusional." Yan Hanli's expression froze, and then a bit of sinisterness appeared in his eyes, staring at Zhongli Jiju in silence for a while. "Don't you look down on men? You actually get married." Zhongli Jiju said weakly, "How can I look down on men? I just looked down on you. Ka. When Yan Hanli heard this, the jade ring on his finger broke, and his face was no longer smiling. The surrounding swordsmen and the second uncle of the Yan family also glared at him. It was really annoying to be insulted in such an occasion. However, in the face of this naked sarcasm, Yan Hanli calmed down and looked at Zhongli Jiju coldly. Really? Who did you marry? Could it be that someone better than me, the owner of Yankai Villa, could attract your heart? It must be said that although Yan Hanli has an extreme and despicable personality, he was born in a big family after all, with good genes and handsome appearance. He is considered a handsome man in the world. He asked this question because he didn't believe that he could lose to an ordinary Jianghu wanderer, and wanted to see who picked his flower. Zhongli Jiju glanced around and said seriously, "My husband is very good at martial arts, better than the martial arts champion, and handsome. He is the most handsome man in the world and has a high status. Not to mention Yankai Villa, even the Tang family is not worthy of polishing his shoes." Ha ha ha. Hearing the nonsense, even the surrounding swordsmen laughed out loud. How can this description be a human? It's impossible that she is stronger than Wu Kuei, so could she marry Eunuch Jia? Eunuch Jia has a high status, but how can he be more handsome than all the men in the world? Yan Hanli relaxed a little after hearing this, and knew that Zhongli Jiju said these words on purpose to anger him, and said calmly, "Oh? Really?" Zhongli Jiju nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. "Yes, I married him a few years ago, and gave birth to 3 children for him. He is very good to me." Yan Hanli didn't believe this nonsense at all, and didn't want to chat with him, so he said coldly, "I'll give you one last chance, you can choose by yourself. If you make a move, you may not see the sun for the rest of your life." Zhongli Jiju shook her head. "I'm serious, my husband is right behind, you have to ask him about this." Yan Hanli frowned slightly, raised her eyes and looked outside the gate behind Zhongli Jiju. There was only a big red horse on the empty street, nothing else. "Why, your husband is a horse." Zhongli Jiju sighed and raised her chin. "It's behind you, not behind me." Everyone in the hall turned their heads when they heard this. Yan Hanli knew that Zhongli Jiju was cunning and didn't believe in this little trick that distracted people, but before he could say anything, his second uncle next to him pulled his sleeve. "Hanli, behind." Yan Hanli frowned and turned his head to look, but saw that a young man in white sat next to the tea table he had just made, holding his sword and looking at him. The young man in white had sword-like eyebrows and clear eyes. Just a side profile could tell that he was stunningly beautiful. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 494. In Tingquan Tower, there are only a few piano sounds. More than 40 swordsmen stood in the corridor on the second floor, holding their hands on the handles of their swords with serious expressions on their faces, staring at the uninvited guest next to the tea table. While I was shocked by this man's skill, I also had a sudden realization. Just now I thought Zhongli Jiju was telling nonsense, but now it seems that he is indeed much more handsome than the owner of the village. No wonder. Yan Hanli didn't hear a single sound and had no idea when the young man in white entered the hall. However, he was excited just now, and it was understandable that he was a little careless. Then he turned around with slightly cold eyes. "Who are you?" Su Buletinling held the gold-sheathed Yanling knife and looked at it with a stern face, but a little helpless in his heart. After discussing with Zhongli Jiju and cooperating with each other, Zhongli Jiju went in from the front to find out the depth, while he sneaked in from the dark, waiting for the opportunity to kill with one blow, and then the two of them walked away. The result was good. Zhongli Jiju, a trouble-making woman, kept telling nonsense and insisted on taking him out to make people angry. He was about to die. What was the point of doing all this mess? But after all the words were said, Su Buling couldn't explain, and he didn't bother to explain. He turned his head and his eyes were slightly unruly. Your ears don't work? Her husband. Yan Hanli's eyelids twitched, and he looked at the masters in the surrounding village out of the corner of his eye, then looked back, his eyes showing a bit of coldness. Okay, you guys came together, just in time. Zhongli Jiju moved her steps and walked around Su Buling from the outside. With a bit of admiration and attachment, she said softly. "Ms. Sir, let's go," without arguing with him. Su Buling took advantage of the situation and held Zhongli Jiju's little hand. "Don't be afraid." Zhongli Jiju was just acting on the spot, but she didn't expect Su Buling to be serious. She retracted her hand and glanced at Su Buling in annoyance, but said softly, The affection between a man and his concubine is endless, but that's probably all." Yan Hanli, who was treated as if he didn't exist, had veins popping up on his forehead. He suddenly flicked his sleeves and said coldly, "You are so courageous. At this time, you still want to leave even after you are here. You think that I, Yankai Villa, can't be crushed." Su Buling really had no intention of talking nonsense with these scum, so he let go of Zhongli Jiju's hand, stood up with the Yanling knife, and looked around. "If you want to fight, just do it. What's the point of talking so much nonsense?" Yan Hanli clenched his fists, nodded, and stretched out his hand. The second uncle of the Yan family next to him felt that the opponent was too aggressive and something might go wrong. He wanted to dissuade him, but there were more than 40 people present. No matter how hard they thought, there was no way they would suffer. After a slight hesitation, he handed Yan Han the Yan Fei Dao on his waist. "Li." Su Buling saw the scene and gently spread his hands. "Are you still ready for a duel?" Yan Hanli's eyes were fierce. "Do you think I'm stupid?" After saying this, the blade of the sword was unsheathed, and a cold light appeared in the hall. "Kill." With an order, more than 40 swordsmen in the corridor on the second floor jumped down from the fence, and there seemed to be a rain of people in the hall. Yan Hanli flew forward with a sword in one hand, and took the lead in killing Su Buling, who was 10 steps away. Although his character was a bit despicable, Yan Hanli could succeed as the owner of the village, and his martial arts skills were definitely good. The Yanling sword in his hand was like the dragon travels all over the world, flashing and leaping without any flaws, and in the blink of an eye it has already taken 3 steps. The second uncle of the Yan family, who was retreating, saw this scene with deep relief in his eyes. Although he was put in a knot by a woman back then, it could be regarded as a kind of encouragement. If Yan Hanli hadn't been embarrassed to come out to deal with his friends, he wouldn't have been able to concentrate on practicing martial arts. After 10 years of sharpening, this knife is enough to restore the former glory of Yankai Villa. But before the second uncle of the Yan family could finish his emotion, the next scene made his eyes tear open. I saw the extremely arrogant young man in white, facing the brazen attack of dozens of swordsmen, without any trace of panic on his face. He strode forward to face the rushing Yan Hanli, holding the handle of the knife with his right hand, and draw the knife and slash with a smooth and flowing movement. Cha! The cold light disappeared in a flash, and the two of them had passed each other. Su Buling walked towards the people who jumped down with a long bloody knife, and said with emotion, "Good knife." Yan Hanli rushed forward with the knife in one hand. Before he could use what he had learned throughout his life, he saw that his opponent had already dodged away from him. There was a bit of ferocity in his eyes, and he held the knife and wanted to strike back with the knife on his back, but for some reason, his body did not turn back, and his movements and vision were stagnant. A cold feeling came from his chest and abdomen, followed by a stinging pain, and his feet seemed to have lost all feeling. Looking down, he saw a blood line on the left side of the robe under the ribs, all the way to the right side of the ribs. How is it possible? Before his body fell down, Yan Hanli even forgot about Zhongli Jiju and looked back hard, but the white robe had already gone away. The owner of the village. Be bold. You. In an instant, The crowd was excited. Many Yan family swordsmen jumped from the second floor. Their shock was covered up by their anger, and they cursed loudly. The second uncle of the Yan family's eyes instantly turned blood red, and without thinking he rushed forward with fists in his hands. "Go up! You are so brave!" Before he finished shouting, Su Buling turned around and kicked the second uncle of the Yan family sideways, sending him flying across the chest. He hit the three swordsmen who had fallen down and knocked them out of the window. Falling into the dragon pool, one does not know whether one will live or die. Zhongli Jiju did not watch the show. When many swordsmen fell down, he took out a flying knife and poisonous needle. Standing behind Su Buling, the goddess sprinkled them out like flowers. It's just that these swordsmen were already prepared for Zhongli Jiju. They split the flying needles and flying knives with a few swords, and rushed towards Su Buling after landing. Sparks flew everywhere in the tea house, and the singer who played the piano screamed and crawled under the piano table. Su Buling remained calm when faced with the encirclement of dozens of people. He held the Yanling knife and pulled it diagonally from left to right. There was almost no one who could get together, but in just 10 steps, 7 or 8 people were lying on the ground. The blood of many swordsmen surged for a moment. When they saw Su Buling killing people like he was chopping melons and vegetables, they suddenly regained their composure. They all stopped and formed a circle with their blades in hand. Their eyes were frightened and cautious, and they did not dare to step forward. Su Buling had already killed the real owner and was too lazy to spend more time with a group of miscellaneous fish. When he saw that no one dared to come forward, he neatly sheathed his sword and spread his right hand. "Do you still want to fight?" Many swordsmen seemed to have seen the king of hell who was seeking death. They knew how to fight even though they were willing to die. After a few people leaning against the door sneaked out, they fled in a devastating rout. Everyone rushed to flee in all directions, and they were missing from the beginning to the end. Say half a word. The huge tea house became quiet, the hall was in a mess, the body was lying crookedly on the ground, blood flowed all over the ground and seeped into the cracks in the ground. Yan Hanli, who had been chopped in half, had not yet expired, and did not utter a cry. Instead, he looked at Su Buling's back with a blank look, as if he still hadn't figured out the current situation. Su Buling walked closer, pierced the back of Yan Hanli's neck with a knife, left the knife on the spot, turned around and said, "Let's go." Zhongli Jiju didn't expect to finish the shot so quickly. She held the small bottle of poisonous needles in her hand, glanced around a few times, said "oh," then followed Su Buling with her skirt in hand. The commotion in Tingquan Tower had already closed the doors of the few shops that had been disturbed. The long street was empty and lifeless, as if it were a dead city. Zhongli Jiju slowed down for half a step, followed Su Buling behind him, looked back at Tingquan Tower, hesitated, and said softly, "Su Buletinling, you are so awesome." The eyebrows are curved, showing a bit of admiration, this time it is true. Su Buling smiled softly and turned his head to look at the shy Zhongli Jiju. "You should vent your anger for your wife?" Zhongli Jiju frowned slightly. "Su Buling, sister, I'm just having fun, I'm done with it." Su Buling walked on the snowy long street with a stern look on his face. "Don't do such inexplicable tricks in the future. It's not interesting at all. If you do this again, your nonsense will become true for me." Zhongli Jiju was shocked, but did not refute, and nodded lightly, "I know, I'm just not convinced." The way Yan Hanli looked back then was disgusting. When he walked to the place where the horses were parked, Su Buling untied the reins and saw that Zhongli Jiju looked completely different from the Chuchen fairy in the past. He remembered one thing. "Miss Jiju, aren't you pretending to be a fairy and want to accept me as your disciple? Why did you suddenly change your temper? Now you don't look as dignified as the master at all." Zhongli Jiju's face calmed down a bit, he held the big red horse and thought for a moment, shook his head and said with a smile, "It's just a joke." Based on our friendship, it doesn't matter if I teach you these skills. You don't need to be a disciple. Didn't you say that the rules of the sect are immutable? Why are you suddenly able to do so again? Zhongli Jiju looked slightly embarrassed and smiled coquettishly. I set the rules of the school, but now I have changed my mind. Don't mention this, it's getting dark soon, so quickly find a safe place to stay. Su Buletinling smiled secretly in his heart and said no more. The two led their horses out of the market. When they approached the street entrance, they saw two people standing under the large archway with the word Longtan engraved on it. Both of them are wearing raincoats and bamboo hats. The difference is that one has a sword on his back and the other holds a sword in his hand. They are separated to the left and right, motionless, just like the two gods who have stood there for many years, integrated with the heaven and earth. There seemed to be no life at all. The two people standing under the big archway were clearly visible, but Zhongli Jiju didn't notice it. It wasn't until she noticed that Su Buling had stopped that Zhongli Jiju noticed. Who is this person? Zhongli Jiju took half a step back, with a bit of caution in her eyes. She was considered an expert after all, and she didn't even notice people standing in front of her. She almost walked into their faces. Her steady strength alone was extraordinary. Su Buletinling frowned and glanced at the two raincoaters. Feeling a bit of pressure, he hesitated and took off the black cloth-wrapped chariot from the side of the horse. Zhongli Jiju secretly pulled Su Buling's sleeve and hesitated. The one who comes is not good, so leaving is the best option. If you dare to stand here and wait, you won't be afraid of us running away. Su Buling replied softly and strode towards the archway. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 495. The wind was as cold as a knife, dark clouds gathered in the sky, snowflakes fell on the bluestone street, and the two big horses sprayed bursts of white mist from their nostrils. The white boots stepped through half an inch of snow and stopped in front of the big archway. The black cloth-wrapped blade pointed at the ground, motionless as a mountain. Under the word Longtan, Chendeazai and swordsman Ding Yuan lowered their heads slightly, their faces hidden by the edges of their hats. The atmosphere in Shentang Valley seemed to condense with the ice and snow at this time. In the closed shop, a few doorkeepers and shopkeepers hid behind the windows and held their breath to check the situation. Zhongli Jiju stood between the two horses, hesitated for a moment, and then ran quickly behind Su Buling, but she did not dare to speak. Su Buling raised his hand to tell her to stay away, glanced left and right, and spoke calmly. Who are you two? Chendeazai did not speak. Swordsman Ding Yuan raised his bamboo hat and exposed his chin. I'm here to see the prince off from Yuzhu. Send me away from Yuzhu? Su Buling frowned slightly when he heard this, a little confused. Knowing his identity, just let him go. If it was because of the incident on Bodhi Island, the people who wanted him to leave Yuzhu must be King Wu and Dainglu, but Li Hanzhong had already visited in person, so it couldn't be them. The old master from Yuelu Mountain was also informed of this matter, but after the old master brought him here, he would definitely not let him leave without doing anything. The imperial court. If the imperial court had known about this, they would have gone to the king of Wu to trouble him, and they would not have bothered to go to Yuzhu. Su Buling thought about it for a while and felt that either there was a fourth party besides him, King Wu, an old master who knew about Bodhi Island, or these two guys came for the Tang family in Yuzhu. Compared with the former, the probability of the latter is obviously higher. Thinking of this, Su Buling raised his head with a smile. Are you people invited by the Tang family in Yuzhu? It was impossible for the swordsman Ding Yuan to expose the king of Chu behind him. Su Buling could think of it, and he could also think of it, and he nodded lightly at the moment. The Tang family is loyal to the imperial court. If you are in trouble now, we will rush to your aid. The prince is a rich man and should not worry about the little things of the Tang family. I send you away from Yuzhu now to save you the embarrassment of meeting in the future. Su Buling frowned, are you from the imperial court? Ding Yuan did not deny it, and took out the silver medal of the wolf guard from under his bamboo hat, indicating that he was the Aoqi's secret guard. Zhongli Jiju breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that it was someone from the imperial court. It was a wolf guard who came, so he definitely wouldn't dare to kill Su Buling, as long as his life was not in danger. Su Buling saw the wolf guard sign and couldn't help but feel a little worried. Everyone knew that the wolf guard was the eyes and ears of the emperor. It was nothing for him to sneak into Yuzhu, and it was nothing for him to assassinate Tang Xiao, but he was caught on the spot by the wolf guard. If it reaches the ears of the emperor, it will be a big trouble. Thinking of this, Su Buling put away his long hair and nodded slightly. It turns out he is a brother from the Criminal Investigation Department. I came here just for a casual visit and had no intention of going to the Tang family. Since you two think it will affect official duties, I can leave now. As he said that, he turned around and wanted to leave. It's just that if Ding Yuan and Chen Daizai dare to go to Bodhi Island, they can't follow Su Buling. They don't believe that Su Buling can turn around and leave so readily. Ding Yuan raised his hand slightly, wait a minute, the prince is just leaving like this, making empty promises, I can't rest assured. Su Buling paused, turned around and smiled. Why, do you think dead people are the most obedient? Ding Yuan shook his head. Even in Yuzhu, the king of Chu did not dare to kill Su Buling easily. Firstly, he could not wipe his butt clean. Secondly, King Su would cause chaos and make everyone afraid. He couldn't kill Su Buling, and he couldn't follow Su Buling. In order to prevent King Su's lineage from intervening in Bodhi Island, he had no choice but to beat Su Buling down and lie down. Ding Yuan said, I'm afraid I have to let the prince lie down for a while, and say I'm sorry first. When Su Buling heard this, he turned around and glanced at the two of them. If you take action, there's no way I won't fight back. When the time comes, don't go to the capital to complain, saying that I'm disrespectful to the current holy emperor. Ding Yuan untied the string of the koi raincoat, and the koi raincoat slipped off, revealing a black military uniform. Your Majesty, please excuse me. Su Buling knew that a fierce battle was unavoidable, so he didn't say anything more. He raised his hand and tore off the black cloth wrapped in the long dragon-patterned sword. The bright sword slid out into a semicircle on the snow, and he raised his left hand and hooked. Bring it on. Ding Yuan held the long sword and did not take action directly. It stands to reason that with their seniority, it would be impossible for them to gang up on a junior, but the stakes were very high this time, and Su Buling was also a newly promoted martial artist, so he could easily be injured. In order not to affect the important affairs of Bodhi Island, Ding Yuan turned his head and looked at Chen Daizai next to him. Chen Daizai agreed to the king of Chu's request, and naturally he would not break his promise. He raised his hand and pulled away the rope of the koi raincoat under his neck, revealing a Taoist robe embroidered with black and white yin and yang fish. His tall body stood in the cold wind, his robes were hunting, and his figure was like old pines and trees. Zhongli Jiju frowned and took a closer look. Suddenly his face turned pale and he recognized the person wearing the robe of the Taoist leader. Zhongli Jiju met Chen Daizai once when he was blocking the door at Changqing Temple, and he knew very well how powerful this hot-tempered Taoist priest was. During the period when Emperor Daoyu did not choose the 10 Wuokui, the most famous ones in the world were Daokui Lao Situ and Wuodayan killer Chen Daizai. Chen Daizai was the direct disciple of the former Wuodayan swordsman Kingxu Jinren. He was a knight since the day he came out of the mountain. Jueshan, who has never met an opponent so far, is also one of the top figures among the 10 Wuokui today. She did not expect to meet him here. Zhongli Jiju quickly took a few steps closer to Su Buling and whispered. Oh no, it's Wuodayan god of killing Chen Daizai. I may not be able to defeat him. Su Buling guessed it was Chen Daizai from the Taoist robe and the immovable aura, but what if he knew he couldn't defeat him? He was blocking the door now, and it was obvious that he wanted to make him lie down for a month, and not let him run away. Su Buling pointed his spear at the snow with one hand, thought for a while, raised his hand and said, "Jeju, you stay aside, I can't help in this situation." Zhongli Jeju knew that she couldn't help. She could use poison to deal with ordinary people in the martial arts world, but it was wishful thinking to deal with Wu Kuei. Even Xuechenzi could defend against the dragon-locking goo thrown by Su Buling, not to mention Chen Daizai who followed the inner family. Zhongli Jeju hesitated a little, but still didn't dare to be a burden, and retreated to the corner of the house on the street. The sky gradually darkened, and the cold wind blew the banners of the street restaurant. Chen Daizai took off his bamboo hat, threw it lightly, and nailed it to the stone pillar of the memorial archway, cutting into the stone pillar for more than an inch. This was considered a show of force. Zhongli Jeju was secretly shocked and stepped back a little. Chen Daizai looked at Su Buling with a calm expression. "My friend, I suggest you do it yourself to avoid hurting each other's harmony." Su Buling glanced at the bamboo hat stuck on the stone pillar, chuckled, and raised his long spear horizontally until his eyes were level with the spear tip with his feet one in front of the other. The waves behind the Yangtze River push the waves in front, and the waves in front die on the beach. "Master Chen, don't be too crazy." Chen Daizai smiled a little and raised his chin. "Come on." Bang. In an instant, the blue stone tiles on the street cracked and made a loud bang. Zhongli Jeju only felt a flash of a figure in front of him, and Su Buling had already arrived under the memorial archway, holding a long spear like a fierce dragon exploring the sea, and stabbed Chen Daizai's throat with a spear. Ding Yuan was the best swordsman under the King of Chu. He might not be as good as Chen Daizai, but he was definitely not a mediocre one. He drew out the 3-foot-long green sword in his hand, tapped the ground with his toes, and stabbed Su Buling from the side like a ghost. Using the majority to bully the minority, despicable. Zhongli Jeju saw the two people fighting together, and his eyes were full of anger, but he could do nothing. "Ah!" Su Buling stabbed out with a spear, and before Ding Yuan got close, he had already arrived in front of Chen Daizai, trying to catch Chen Daizai off guard and get rid of the strongest one first. The power of the spear was terrifying, and the flying snow that fell on the spear tip turned into powder as soon as it touched it. In a Grandmaster level duel, a moment of negligence could produce an irreparable flaw, resulting in a complete defeat. Facing the powerful spear tip, Chen Daizai did not draw his sword, but just lightly lifted the sleeves of his Taoist robe, like dispersing the clouds in front of him, and swept it on the spear tip. The action seemed to be a casual one, but Su Buling felt a pulling force coming from the spear tip, which deviated the direction of the spear with a force that was as powerful as a pound, and passed by Chen Daizai's side. Snap! The 2-foot spear tip poured into the stone pillar of the archway and pierced through it without any stagnation. Chen Daizai raised his hand and grasped the hilt of the sword on his back at this time. His momentum changed quietly, like catkins in the wind. The long sword came out of the sheath with a clang, and then chopped down with the momentum of splitting the mountain. Although he attacked later than Ding Yuan, Chen Daizai arrived first. His tall body was like an unshakable mountain. The Taoist sword in his hand seemed to have a huge force of 10,000 pounds, with a terrifying sword sound. Shua! Su Buling's eyes were slightly startled. He did not dare to slack off. He twisted the spear with both hands and forcibly made a gap in the stone pillar of the archway and pulled it out. The end of the spear stabbed Ding Yuan, who was approaching from the left, and at the same time, he held it horizontally to block the long sword that was chopped down. Clang! The sharp sound of metal clashing spread from the first to the end of the street. The long sword fell on the spear, and it visibly bent the spear held horizontally in Su Buling's hand. It did not stop and continued to press towards Su Buling's face. The terrifying force came from his arms, and the bluestone under Su Buling's feet immediately cracked. His tall body was chopped out by a one-handed sword, falling on the snow, sliding back more than 3 meters, until he had released all the force, and then he patted the street lightly with his palm and stood up. Zhongli Jiju couldn't see Chen Daozai's movements clearly. Even though he was mentally prepared, he was frightened and pale when he saw Su Buling flying out. He was slightly relieved when he saw Su Buling's face normal. On the snowy surface of the silent long street, there was a clear trace of the back of the robe. After Chen Daozai slashed down with his sword, the tip of the sword pointed diagonally at the ground, and strode forward. He didn't run, but walked towards Su Buling. The vibration of his robe was in a balanced rhythm. He said in a deep voice, "If this is all you can do, I still advise you to do it yourself, it's more decent." Ding Yuan stabbed the air with his sword and also wrapped up from the left. Su Buling stood up smoothly, and he didn't feel any discomfort after fully unloading the force. He twisted his shoulders, held the long spear again and took a stance, revealing a bright smile. "It seems that I underestimated you. You are better than Xuechenzi. Swords have no eyes, Master Chen, be careful. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guangong Zi. Chapter 496. Snow was flying all over the lakeside, and the cold wind was biting the bones on the street. Su Buling stood with his spear in both hands, and did not take the initiative to move forward. He looked directly at Chen Daozai, who was walking towards him with big strides, and his body was as still as a pine tree. The swordsman Ding Yuan was the best swordsman under the command of the king of Chu. He was known for his agility and dexterity. He dragged his sword and rushed past Chen Daozai, who was walking with big strides. When he was about 2 feet away from Su Buling, he suddenly sank down, shoveled up the snow with his long boots, and slid directly over to the ground without touching the ground. As the saying goes, an inch longer is an inch stronger. The spear is the king of soldiers and is invincible in battle. Su Buling held a 2-foot-long spear, which was the longest among the 18 weapons. No matter which direction he attacked from, he would definitely be shot first. But where there are advantages, there must be disadvantages. The spear pole is too long to be retracted freely. Ding Yuan and Chen Daozai both held one-handed swords, which were disadvantageous in terms of strength and distance, but in terms of lightness and flexibility, the only weapons that could compare to them were short weapons such as daggers and ime thorns. Ding Yuan chose the relatively cheap ground-lying move in the martial arts world right from the start, because he saw that Su Buling was standing on the ground and could not use his long spear. He had no other way to deal with him except a poking spear move, and as long as he moved forward, he would be unarmed. Bah, shameless! Zhongli Jiju, who was watching from the side, saw that the opponent was 2 against 1 and still used this kind of move to attack the lower 3 roads, and his eyes were angry and anxious. Those who may have reached the top of the martial arts are all those who have crawled out of the mountains of corpses and seas of blood. In the final analysis, martial arts are one standing, the other lying down. There is no good or bad in moves, only useful ones. Only the young and inexperienced will care about whether the moves are decent or not. Ding Yuan's figure was like a ghost, and he slid from the snow to Su Buling in an instant. Su Buling only had a long spear in his hand, so it was impossible for him to do anything fancy. He stepped back quickly, and the spear in his hand shot out like a dragon, using the Guanzhong Eagle Claw Fanza Sec's signature skill, 5 steps and 13 spears to poke the foot. Snap, snap, snap. The 2-foot spear tip fell on the bluestone floor tiles like heavy rain, piercing into it and retracting it like a knife cutting tofu, leaving a series of holes on the ground in the blink of an eye. Ding Yuan held the sword in his right hand and moved on the ground like a ghost, dodging 8 spears in a dangerous manner. When he saw that he could stab Su Buling's left hand holding the spear, he suddenly paused. He glanced away and saw that the 2-foot spear tip pierced the sleeve of his left arm, nailing it to the ground. Su Buling's eyes were slightly fixed, and he swept through the army without hesitation, trying to behead Ding Yuan, who was sticking to the ground. At this moment, Chen Daizai, who was walking with big strides, suddenly became faster and pounced forward without any accumulation of strength. The Taoist sword in his hand made a sound of sword sound and went straight to Su Buling's chest. Su Buling's eyes were on Ding Yuan on the ground. He noticed a black shadow approaching in front of him with his peripheral vision. He thought it was not good and changed his moves immediately. He kicked the lance with his right foot, breaking the dragon-patterned lance into an arc. Then the lance tip inserted into the bluestone floor tile broke the stone. More than a dozen pieces of broken stone, along with the lance tip, bounced from bottom to top towards Chen Daizai. Chen Daizai's eyes were calm, and he raised his sleeves to sweep away the broken stones that were as sharp as arrows, but in this way, the sudden attack was temporarily stopped. Ding Yuan's sleeves were torn into a large piece, and he did not miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. While Su Buling kicked up the lance and blocked Chen Daizai, he slapped the ground with his left hand. As his body bounced up, the sharp blade in his right hand was already in front of Su Buling. With 1 against 2, the opponent was Chen Daizai, who was equally matched. Su Buling was unable to defend against the opponent's close attack, and the long weapon in his hand became a burden in an instant. Facing Ding Yuan, who rushed to his face, he had no way to defend himself. Ding Yuan also saw this opportunity and attacked with all his strength, trying to take Su Buling down in one fell swoop. But Su Buling was not a mediocre person. He realized that he had no time to retract the long spear that was stabbing at Chen Daizai to block Ding Yuan. Without any hesitation, he abandoned the spear, put his palms together to clamp the stabbing blade, and at the same time, he used his shoulder to hit the tip of the spear with all his strength. SSS. The dragon-patterned long spear was hit by a huge force, as if it was shot by a bed crossbow, breaking the wind and tearing through the flying snow, and stabbed directly in front of Chen Daizai. This move was launched in the battle, which was unexpected. Chen Daizai's slightly indifferent eyes changed for the first time. The long sword turned half a circle in his hand, and he blocked the spear tip with the sword spine. Ding! A crisp sound spread throughout the streets. The spear tip, which contained great power, did not stop because of the long sword's obstruction, but pierced through the sword spine, exploding a string of sparks. But the sword of Wudan killer god Chen Daizai was not a common thing. Although the sword body was pierced, only a small tip was revealed from the other side. The blade was not broken, and the unstoppable long spear was blocked by force. Unfortunately, the one-handed sword was too thin and soft. Even if Chen Daizai used his left hand to support the top of the sword, it was still inevitable that the sword was bent and hit the chest of the Taoist robe. After the muffled sound, Chen Daizai, who was striding forward, slid back at a speed several times faster than the attack. On the other side, Su Buling held the long sword with both hands and knocked out the long spear with his shoulder. Ding Yuan hit with all his strength, but found that it was like piercing into an iron plate, and it was difficult to save half an inch, so he twisted the hilt fiercely. This is a useful move when the long sword is restricted. It is almost a conditioned reflex of the muscles, and there is no need to think about it. Su Buling held the blade with both hands. If he let go, he could continue to stab. If he did not let go, it would be enough to crush Su Buling's palm. At this point, he was actually defeated. But what Ding Yuan did not expect was that the prince in front of him was not an ordinary iron head. Su Buling did not let go at all. He risked his hands being crushed, holding the sword tightly, and his body turned half a circle with the twisting of the sword. He kicked Ding Yuan's neck with a whip kick. Ding Yuan twisted the long sword with his right hand. He didn't expect Su Buling to be so bold. He noticed the strong wind coming from his ears. He only had time to raise his left hand to block for a moment, and then he felt as if a battering ram had been swept over him. His body turned into a broken sack in an instant, and was swept to the ground by a kick. The master-level masters exchanged moves with each other, but it was nothing more than a spark of calcium carbide. Zhongli Jiju stared and did not dare to blink. He still did not see all the movements of the three of them. He only saw Chen Daizai and Ding Yuan stepping forward at the same time and retreating at the same time. Especially Ding Yuan, his appearance was tragic. He was beaten by a group of people. His legs hit the ground, bounced up again, rolled across the street, and broke the fence of the tea house before he could stop. Good. Zhongli Jiju might have been too nervous. She actually stamped her feet at this moment, wanting to run up and kiss them. But it's obviously too early to be happy now. Chen Daizai, who was knocked out by Chang Hu, pressed his long sword against Zhang Feng. He only took 3 or 4 steps back and then stopped. He waved the long sword lightly, picked out Long Wenjiang, who was at the end of his crossbow, and nailed him to the street. On the wall. There was a little blood on the chest of Chen Daizai's Taoist robe, but that's all. There was no embarrassment, at most it was just some skin trauma. Of course, it is very rare for Chen Daizai to be injured. At least as Zhongli Jiju has grown up, this is the first time I heard that Chen Daizai suffered a loss at the hands of others, and it was still a 2-on-1 situation. Chen Daizai's face became a little more serious. He looked down, raised his hand and patted his chest twice, and continued to step forward. Cough cough cough. The swordsman Ding Yuan was obviously stunned by the kick and fell into the fence. He coughed repeatedly and blinked hard, with a look of shock in his eyes. He waited for a moment before holding his sword and standing up unsteadily. Su Buling stood there, glanced at the two people who looked slightly embarrassed, spread his hands, and said slightly teasingly, "That's it? Still fighting?" The words were quite arrogant, but Su Buling was obviously feeling weak in his heart. He was now unarmed. The 2 blows he took with all his strength would have killed 8 times for an ordinary person. But of these 2 guys, Chen Daizai only scratched his skin and didn't even break his sword. The other one received a whip on the neck, and his strength was enough to kick the person's head off, but this person was just stunned for a moment. Not even a single bone was broken, and he stood up like this. In this case, he would not be able to fight without the weapon in his hand. Su Buletinling spoke sarcastically at this time, just to delay for a while and find a weapon. Facing Su Buling's ridicule, Chen Daizai said nothing and stopped 3 feet away. Ding Yuan received a strong whip, and his neck was almost out of place. His face turned blue, he twisted his neck hard, and nodded while holding the sword. Excellent skills and well-deserved reputation. Keep going. Su Buring nodded and walked towards the long pole nailed to the wall, trying to get the weapon back and continue fighting. But this is obviously not a turn-based arena. Chen Daizai and Ding Yuan are both top masters in the world. How could they fall for such a delaying tactic? They have lost their weapons and want to get them back. What are you thinking? Su Buling had just taken half a step, when Chen Daizai tapped the ground with the tips of his slippers, rose into the air like a willow catkin, and pressed towards Su Buling like a falcon pouncing on a rabbit. Ding Yuan suppressed the surge of energy and blood in his chest and abdomen, stepped on the ground with both feet, rushed out of the fence with a sharp sword in hand, and pressed Su Buring from the side again. The 2 of them worked together flawlessly. Su Buling could not block the 2 swords with his bare hands. Seeing that the other party was not showing any grace, he could only raise his hand and said urgently, "Knife." Zhongli Jiju had already sensed something was wrong, and while cursing the 2 of them for shamelessly bullying the juniors, he quickly pulled out the Minghong sword from his waist, and in case Chen Daizai stopped him midway and threw it back, he threw it towards the street behind Su Buling. Su Buletinling stepped heavily on the ground and rushed backwards. In the blink of an eye, Chen Daizai was already in front of him. Chen Daizai wore a Taoist robe and hunted in the wind and snow. He jumped into the air and fell as if he was riding the wind. The long sword danced rapidly in his hand. The sword was so fast that only an afterimage was left. In the blink of an eye, 12 swords were shot. The sword stabbed. Xiang Su Buling asked for acupuncture points all over his body. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 497. The Wudang god of killing and the top 3 swordsmen are not in vain. Chen Daozai's swordsmanship is not much worse than that of Zulu, who specializes in swordsmanship. With the blessing of Taoist martial arts, a sword is extremely light and elegant. There was only the light of the sword in Su Buling's eyes, and he couldn't even see the sword. He tightened his heartstrings as he retreated at full speed, and used his extraordinary perception to forcefully dodge. Even so, he was hit by 3 swords in a row, one under the ribs and one on the shoulder. Left arm, the sword edge was retracted at a touch, and blood oozed from the 3 wounds almost at the same time. Zhongli Jiju's face turned pale, but even Ding Yuan, who was chasing them together, couldn't catch up with the 2 of them. She had no choice but to watch. Whispering, rustling. 12 swords came out at once, leaving 3 bloody wounds, but Su Buling also avoided the critical point. In an instant, he retreated more than 3 feet, and Su Buling did not look back. He accurately caught the Minghong Dao flying in the air with his backhand. His eyes suddenly changed, showing a bit of ferocity. Ah! The sword flashed in the wind and snow, and the white robe on his arms exploded due to the strong muscles. Su Buling paused while retreating, holding the sword in his right hand, slashing it with all his strength from back to front, pointing directly at Chen Daozai, who thrust out the 13th sword. Chen Daozai's eyes narrowed slightly. When he stabbed out the sword in his hand, Su Buling's sword would also fall on his head. Both parties exchanged lives for lives. It was obviously impossible for him to exchange lives with Su Buling, and he couldn't. At that moment, the blade of the sword flipped over and was blocked in front of him, with the 5 fingers of his left hand sticking out like a hook. Bite. The blade slashed down with the force of a mountain-cutting motion, and accurately landed around the hole where the long spear had just pierced. The already incomplete sword could no longer withstand the sharpness of the Minghong sword. It split into 2 pieces, and the blade continued to slash downward toward Chen Daozai's shoulder. It was just that Chen Daozai stretched out his left hand and firmly grasped the back of the Minghong Dao, and yanked it back. At the same time, he hit Su Buling's chest with Wudang's signature stunt Wild Horse Parting Mane with his right hand. Tai Chi is different from Bhe, it seems soft and light, but the inner strength contained in it is extraordinary. Chen Daozai, as the contemporary headmaster of Wudang Mountain, the world's most powerful Taoist sect, has no equal in the power of this palm. Su Buling's chest and abdomen suddenly felt tight, his eyes were bloodshot, and even his vision was blurry. The tall body was bent into a bow that was about to break due to the shock of the palm, and then it shot out backwards with the force of pulling off the string. But Su Buling was by no means a soft-footed shrimp. He slapped his chest with a palm. He did not let go of the Minghong knife in his hand. Instead, he twisted the blade and slid it towards the wrist holding the back of the knife. A knife in the hands and feet of a martial artist was more serious than a knife in the chest and back. The tendons in his hands were severed and he lost most of his combat effectiveness on the spot. Su Bulenling did not let go. Under the huge pulling force, Chen Daozai could not snatch the knife away. Instead, the sharp blade cut the inside of his wrist. The wound was deep enough to see the bone. Any further cuts would cut off the tendons and blood vessels in his hand, so he only let go of the back of the knife. The long sword was broken, so it would be impossible for Su Buling to hold the sword. After Chen Daozai's right hand shot out with a wild horse's mane, he took advantage of the situation and slapped Su Buling's right arm. Because the distance of the force is too short, this shot has no lethality, but it is enough to knock out the Minghong sword. Bang! After a muffled sound, Su Buling flew across the street for more than 10 feet before landing. He slid on the ground for more than 10 feet before he could stop by grabbing the bluestone floor tiles with his hands. The remaining energy in the palm was still there, and although no muscles or bones were broken, it still caused Su Buling to spurt a mouthful of blood on the snow. Chen Daozai's left arm was bleeding profusely, and the Taoist robe on his chest had been dyed red, but his face was as calm as ever. He strode forward, seemingly slowly and then quickly, and in a flash he was in front of Su Buling again. His Taoist robes were bulging and his big sleeves were fluttering. Suddenly, a bird's tail hidden in his sleeve directly hit Su Buling's chest and abdomen. Su Buling's reaction was not slow at all. He had just stood up from the ground, but he was as steady as a mountain with his feet rooted in the earth. He put his right fist into his waist, and then he lifted up from the ground with a mountain climbing and exploring horse posture, and his fist was blasted out like a cannon hammer, hitting Chen Daozai's palm. Beiji emphasizes extreme hardness and extreme yang, while Wudang is best at overcoming hardness with softness, so the palms and fists connected without any movement. Chen Daozai put his palm against Su Buling's fist, pushed it away from his side as if holding a moon in his arms, and leaned his shoulder against Su Buling's. Su Buling has practiced martial arts since he was a child and has an understanding of hundreds of martial arts schools. He may not be proficient in it himself, but he knows a little bit about it. When Chen Daozai moved his fist away and came closer, he also took advantage of the situation and hit him with a leaning body. This time, it can be said that the earth is shaking. Their shoulders collided, and the bluestone floor tiles they were standing on exploded. The falling snow was raised again, and the white robes of the Taoist priests were torn into strips at the same time. In head-to-head combat, no one in the world can compare with Su Buling. Chen Daozai obviously suffered a loss this time. He was knocked out like a rootless catkin and flew to the street behind. But at the moment when Chen Daozai flew backwards, a sharp sword suddenly came out from between the broken Taoist robes and penetrated directly into Su Buling's left shoulder, which Su Buling had no time to take back. Cha! The blade of the sword penetrated nearly 2 inches into the flesh. Su Buling groaned. He clamped the blade between his fingers, tightened his shoulder muscles, and at the same time forcibly turned around and performed a side kick. Both sides were blocked by Chen Daozai. Ding Yuan, who had just appeared from behind Chen Daozai, had no time to change his sword before his sword broke on the spot, and he was kicked in the chest. Under the huge force, there was a crisp sound of bones breaking. Ding Yuan flew back immediately after Chen Daozai, and a mouthful of old blood spurted out in the air. Su Buling pulled out half of the sword blade on his shoulder. 1 against 2 was too much, so he turned and rushed towards Yangtze River. Walk! Zhongli Jiju was about to jump in a hurry. Seeing that Su Buling was unwilling to fight, he quickly threw a lot of bottles in his hand to the street, then jumped onto the roof and ran towards the Yangtze River. Chen Daozai was knocked out, but he still did not lose his balance. After landing lightly, he strode forward again. Without turning his eyes, he raised his hand to swing the sleeves of his slightly tattered Taoist robe, and easily caught several small porcelain bottles that were thrown at him. And then thrown forward. Whispering, rustling. The porcelain bottle turned into a sharp blade, piercing Su Buling's back. Su Buling wished he could slap Zhongli Jiju's butt a few times, but he had no time to speak at this time. He leaned over to avoid the porcelain bottle, sprinted sideways with all his strength, and jumped into the Yangtze River in winter. The porcelain bottle exploded. Fortunately, Zhongli Jiju was a little bit thoughtful and knew that the poison could not reach Chen Daozai, so he only threw itching powder. After Su Buling fell into the river, he tapped on the cold river surface a few times like a dragonfly, and ran downstream at an extremely fast speed. As the master of the inner family, Chen Daozai was proficient in Wudang's signature ladder, and he followed effortlessly. The swordsman Ding Yuan received 2 heavy blows and was obviously injured internally. He gritted his teeth and got up and ran to the river. After jumping into the river and running for a few steps, he fell into the river due to unstable internal breathing. The water in the river was only knee-deep, making it impossible to swim. Running in the water was too difficult, so Ding Yuan could only watch the two figures go away. Su Buletinling was galloping across the water. Although there were several wounds on his body, the one that was most deeply injured was Chen Daozai's palm. His chest was shaking, and it still hasn't been suppressed. His heartbeat was at different speeds, and even his breathing was a little laborious. Chen Daozai also felt uncomfortable. His left wrist was bleeding profusely, and his right shoulder was hit hard. He could clearly see the slight twitching of his right arm, which was obviously a contusion. The two chased on the river in Shentang Valley, as fast as galloping horses, but they ran more than 2 miles away in an instant. Zhongli Jiju and Ding Yuan fell behind and disappeared. Chen Daozai's breath was long and his speed did not slow down at all, hanging tightly behind Su Buling. Su Buletinling gradually slowed down, as if exhausted. If you go fast and slow, you will be caught up soon. But when the two people were about 3 feet away from each other, Su Buling, who seemed to be at the end of his strength, suddenly stepped on the boulder protruding from the river. The boulder tilted and shifted on the spot. Su Buling, whose white robe was in pieces, used the force to jump back. He raised his hand and hit Chen Daozai with an elbow. When Chen Daozai saw the boulders on the river, he was on guard. Seeing Su Buling's brazen outburst, he jumped high from the water, tried to fly over Su Buling's head, and stepped on Su Buling at the same time. The purpose of breaking the move is to predict the opponent's moves in advance, so as to respond in advance. Chen Daozai could think of Su Buling's attack, and Su Buling could naturally think of Chen Daozai's defense. Su Buling, who flew out, gave up the elbow attack the moment Chen Daozai jumped up, raised his hand to grab upwards, clasped Chen Daozai's right ankle, and then slammed it into the water. Snap! Chen Daozai's whole body turned into a waving whip and smashed into the biting cold river water. He didn't stop until he made a dent in the sand at the bottom of the river. The waves are splashing, and the Yangkai River is as clear as a mirror, with a thirsty hole carved out of the center of the river. Die! Su Buletinling had veins popping out on his forehead. He grabbed Chen Daozai's ankles with both hands and used force on his waist and abdomen to pull Chen Daozai out of the water and hit him on the other side of the river. Only this time, there was no more splashing sound. Chen Daozai was thrown into the air, with blood obviously oozing from the corner of his mouth. The toe of his shoe kicked Su Buling's wrist twice in succession, kicking away the hands holding his ankles. Under the action of inertia, the whole person flew forward. He went out, landed on the water, and floated for a few times. He didn't get up again until he was completely relieved of his strength. Chen Daozai did not continue to rush over this time. After taking a look at Su Buling, he lightly stepped on the water and escaped into the distance. Tap tap tap. Amidst the crisp sound of treading water, Chen Daozai drifted away. Su Buling's eyes were bloodshot and he chased a distance in the water. When he noticed that Chen Daozai had run away, he stopped and cursed angrily. You humming, come here. You're such a stinky bullnose, you're going to give it back to Wu Kuei, bah. I'll beat you every time I see you. Chen Daozai didn't seem to hear him, and his figure disappeared from sight in the blink of an eye. Su Buling was panting like an ox. After waiting for a moment and seeing that no opponent was chasing him, he couldn't hold on any longer. He lowered his head and looked at the wounds on his body, then took up the cold river water with his hands and wiped his face, then fell into the knee-deep river water. Drifting downstream along the river, too lazy to get up. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 498. The glacier flowed deep into the valley, and it was already night before I knew it. Su Buling lay on the river and rested for a while, suppressing the turbulence in his chest and abdomen, and stopped at a bend in the barren mountains. Crash! Su Buling stood up from the water, dragged the water drops to the river bank, sat down on the rocks on the river beach, tore off the torn strips of robes on his body, and simply dealt with a few wounds on his body. Not long after I sat down, the sound of flapping wings came from the sky. A small sparrow circled in the sky and flew back again. Yes or no? Yes or no? The call came from the rugged and roadless valley. Zhongli Jiju emerged from the dense winter forest, with beads of sweat hanging on his forehead. His eyes were full of anxiety. After seeing Su Buring sitting by the river beach, he raised the skirt, jumped out of the forest and ran to the front. Su Buletin Ling. Are you okay? Su Buling bit the cloth and wrapped it tightly around the wound on his shoulder, then turned his head. You are a doctor, asking me. Zhongli Jiju ran forward and squatted down, pulled up the hem of her skirt to reveal her shiny legs, took off the medicine bottle from the leg ring, and then carefully inspected Su Buling's injuries. There were 4 wounds on his body, but they all avoided the vital points and were just superficial injuries. There was a slap mark on his chest. Although there was no external injury, it looked bruised. Zhongli Jiju quickly held Su Buling's wrist and examined it. The inner breath was a bit chaotic, but not to the extent of internal injury to the hand. It seemed to be in good condition. Su Buling sat on the stone on the river beach and was touched by Zhongli Jiju. His eyes subconsciously moved to the shining leg beside him. It could be regarded as a way to relieve pain. The curves were round and slender, and the tension was very strong. The dark place between the legs cannot be clearly seen, but it is also a bit more hazy and attractive. Zhongli Jiju took her pulse carefully for a moment, and slowly noticed Su Buling's gaze. He frowned, quickly put his legs together, and pulled up his skirt to cover it. At this time, you are still reincarnated as a pervert, are you? Su Buling coughed lightly, thought for a while, coughed a few more times, and fell back. I don't think I can do it anymore. Zhongli Jiju is a doctor. He raised his hand to support Su Buling's back and said angrily, I can't die, I just have to rest for 2 days. I saw you were beaten so badly just now. I thought you were seriously injured. It looks like it's nothing. Seeing that he couldn't deceive Zhongli Jiju, Su Buling gave up and shook his head. We still have to go to Bodhi Island. It's not a life or death fight, and it's not worthwhile to go all out, so I'm a little embarrassed. Chen Daizai probably has some reservations and doesn't go all out. I mean, I ran away with some internal injuries. It's really lawless. Zhongli Jiju checked several times and found that Su Buling was fine. He relaxed a little, tore off the hem of her skirt, poured the golden sore medicine on Su Buling to bandage the wound, and said angrily. You are the prince of the vassal. What's wrong with the emperor's people? The wolf guards are just watchdogs under the Song family, and they are biting the master. When you go back, complain to your father and let him lead troops to level Wuodane Mountain. General Su was able to lead his troops to South Vietnam back then, and he can still scare children so much that they dare not cry. A Wuodane Mountain man takes himself too seriously. Su Buling thought for a moment. Chen Daizai and that swordsman are not wolf guards, nor are they here for the Tang family. Zhongli Jiju was stunned for a moment when he heard this, and frowned. Not the wolf guard? Wuodane Mountain is the state religion of Daewoo, and it has always been close to the royal family. Apart from the current emperor, who can invite him to fight? You. Su Buling just saw the ruthlessness of the 2 men's attacks, and felt something was wrong. Chen Daizai dared to attack me, and he did it so simply, because he knew that I couldn't touch him. If it was the person arranged by Songji, he would attack so hard. I will lie down and pretend to be dead when I go out, and let Songji give my father an explanation. Songji has to stabilize the overall situation, and it is impossible for him to make such a stupid move for the sake of a Tang family, and even if such a stupid move does happen, Chen Daizai will not do it. Silly, if Songji can't suppress Ziliang afterwards, he will definitely send Chen Daizai out to take the blame. Zhongli Jiju thought about it carefully and nodded lightly, it seems so. If it's not the emperor, who could it be? Su Buling snorted softly, if I go out to complain now, if Song Ji doesn't know the inside story, I will definitely let the king of Chu near Wudang Mountain investigate the matter thoroughly. If I find a place by myself, I can't deal with the entire Wudang Mountain by myself, and Suzhou soldiers the horse can't cross Guanzhong Road, and the government can't mobilize people, so we can only ask the king of Chu for help. How do you think the king of Chu will solve this problem? Zhongli Jiju thought for a while, he's inny. Su Buling nodded, Chen Daizai is so confident. He must have the promise of the king of Chu. As long as the king of Chu does not move Wudang Mountain, the foreign troops will not enter, and the Jianghu people will not be able to defeat him. No one can do anything to him. If Zhongli Jiju realized something, he thought for a moment, then it must be King Chu who is behind the scenes, but why did King Chu hit you? Even if King Chu doesn't move to Wudang Mountain, if you lie down and pretend to be dead and say that your life is cut off, the Su family if you want to be eliminated, let the emperor make the decision for you. The emperor will definitely test the pressure on King Chu. You can't just let it go. Su Buling thought about it carefully, the king of Chu must have thought about this method, but he still kicked me out. He must have learned some information from elsewhere, and he knew more than me. He felt that it was inconsistent with what he would gain afterwards. In comparison, offending King Su is nothing, in other words, knowing that something big is about to happen will make everyone in the world not care about the small matter of my fight with Chen Daizai. Zhongli Jiju didn't understand. He frowned and bandaged the wound carefully, what's the big deal? The power of kings is divinely granted, and the wisdom of the Central Plains is chaotic. Su Buling thought about this sentence carefully, thinking of the floods in the south of the Yangtze River but the inability to provide disaster relief. The king of Chu and the king of Wu moved frequently, and said somewhat strangely. Both the king of Wu and the king of Chu want to drive me out, and they have sent so many experts to Bodhi Island. Are they looking for the imperial seal? Zhongli Jiju naturally knows what the jade seal of the country is. Only by obtaining the jade seal can he become emperor. Otherwise, the unjust emperor will be in the wrong position. She said strangely. Your emperor, how can you call him emperor if he has not passed down the imperial seal? Su Buling shook his head, Emperor Dayu inherited the throne from Dachi, and Song Ji has the national jade seal in his hand. I saw it twice when I was studying in Chang'an City, and I have always kept it in Song Ji's hand, but if not jade seal, what else in the world can make two vassal princes guard so tightly, and still be afraid of being interfered with by me, the Lord Prince? Zhongli Jiju thought about it carefully. They were both vassal kings. The difference between him and the emperor was that the dragon embroidered on his clothes only had 4 toes. Apart from the jade seal passed down from the country, there seemed to be nothing else that could make the two vassal kings go to war. Offended. But now that the world is at peace, even if they get the jade seal, no one will dare to show it. What's the use of snatching it? Su Buling thought for a moment, whether a ruler is qualified or not depends entirely on civil and military skills. In order to defend against the northern Qi and other vassal kings, the Song dynasty imposed heavy taxes and raised a large number of soldiers. There were already problems in the internal affairs. If there is another big military chaos, the 6 Song vassal kings will definitely unite the civil and military forces of the Manchu dynasty to elect a new king, and whoever holds the jade seal will definitely be the one. After saying this, Su Buling's face became a little serious. Before the floods in the south of the Yangtze River subside, there will definitely be trouble at the border. My father will guard the western front and it will not affect Songji. Only the eastern front under the direct jurisdiction of the imperial court will have a big mess, which will make the Song dynasty unstoppable. The loss of prestige cannot shake the court and the princes. Zhongli Jiju's face became a little more serious. What should we do? What to do? Su Buling blinked and spread his hands, "It's none of my business. Songji's knife is on my neck. It's good to change to another emperor. Just watch the show." Zhongli Jiju nodded, tied the bandage tightly, and asked again. "Then the beating was in vain. How is that possible? After you go out, write a letter to your father and tell him about these things and be on guard in advance. Then send Lao Xiao out and order the ancestral hall in Wudan Mountain. Lao Xiao is best at this." "Ah. The ancestor hall is an ancestral hall. This is similar to digging up ancestral graves. It's too. I didn't jump on his ancestor's grave to be polite. He beat me up for no reason and made me stare. I want to see what he can do to me if I burn down his ancestor's hall. If he has the guts to come to Suzhou, bite me. Ningyu, he is a disciple of Quan Zhen. You ordered her ancestor." "It's not me who ordered it. I asked Lao Xiao to burn the incense sticks and accidentally lit the golden peak of Wudan Mountain. Master, you can't blame me. Who made the fire protection facilities of Wudan Mountain fail?" Zhongli Jiju's eyes were strange. He was silent for a moment, and then suddenly smiled. "How about I go too? I've already thought about it. We have to go to Bodhi Island and then rush back to Suzhou as soon as possible. If something happens at the border, we won't be able to go back. Let's go." Su Buring waved his hand and stood up with support on the stone. His robe was completely torn, his upper body was bare, and his hair was covered in ice. "From the time I left home in the morning until now, I have been either rushing or fighting. It can be said that I am hungry and cold." Su Buling took 2 steps, feeling cold and hungry, and feeling a little drifting. He raised his hand and put it on Zhongli Jiju's shoulder. Zhongli Jiju was not allowed to be tall, so he staggered under the weight of the tall Su Buling. He quickly put his hands around Su Buling's waist and supported his body. Su Buring was exposed to the cold winter wind, and he was completely naked. He could clearly feel the coldness of his skin here, which was hard to the touch. Zhongli Jiju looked at the snow-covered wilderness and couldn't help but feel anxious. He left his horse in Longtan, and he didn't know if anyone would wait for him. It would definitely be difficult to get over it now, so he could only help Su Buling walk towards the dense forest. With the help of the little sparrow, they find a cave and a grass nest for one night. It was late at night, the wilderness was desolate, and the mountains and rocks on both sides of the river valley were so steep that there was almost no way to go. Su Buling put his arm around Zhongli Jiju's thin shoulder, feeling a little warmth coming from his side. He instinctively moved closer, and finally ended up hugging Zhongli Jiju with his hands on his waist. Zhongli Jiju bit her lower lip, raised her eyes and glanced at Su Buling. When she saw Su Buling looking intently at the road ahead, she breathed a sigh of relief. After thinking about it, she put the sleeves of her skirt on Su Buling's head. "Put it on your back. Although it doesn't have much effect, in the cold world, these hints of warmth can't warm people, but at least they can warm the heart." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 499. A man and a woman are walking alone in the dense forest of the valley. There is white snow everywhere. The man is naked from the waist up and the woman is huddled in the man's arms. If someone sees her, she will definitely think of something strange. It's a pity that in the cold winter months, there are few people alive in Shentang Valley during the day, let alone at night. Zhongli Jiju supported Su Buling and found a wooden shed under the rock wall of the valley. It should be a temporary den built by hunters. It was covered with hay and located in the depression of the rock wall. It was still dry and could only provide a slight wind protection. Although Su Buling had a strong body, he still had to wear clothes. It was okay to resist for an hour in the heavy snow. After taking a cold shower and being frozen in the snow for so long, the muscles in his body began to tremble and his lips were a little blue. Fighting against the severe cold, I had consumed a lot of calories, and my physical strength was a little exhausted, so I sat down in the tree nest and lay down. Zhongli Jiju met Chendaizai or Yankai Villa's enemies alone. He could run away by throwing the lock dragon goo, but he couldn't take Su Buling with him, so he didn't dare to light a fire in the mountains to attract the target. She collected a pile of hay from under the stone wall, came to Su Buring's side, covered Su Buring's body with the hay, then lay down generously next to her, hugged Su Buring's chest with her hands, and whispered, "I don't know what's going on outside. Killing the owner of Yankai Villa and calling a bunch of people over to take revenge is more troublesome than Chendaizai. Let's just wait for a while and then go out at dawn. The warm fragrant nephrite is on the side, and the soft heat can be clearly felt under the ribs. It is very large. Maybe it is because I don't like wearing a belly band. The feeling is very obvious." Su Buletinling hugged the warm girl Juju and wanted to be distracted, but with such a cold character, even that was probably frozen hard. It was so dark inside the grass nest that I couldn't see anything. Zhongli Juju hugged Su Buling tightly. Her expression was very natural, maybe because she felt a little too quiet. She even joked, "Don't think too much. Jianghu is here to help you. You paid me wages and just treat me like a doctor. I don't want to be cured if I'm sick." A little warmth spread all over his body, and the stiffness and sluggishness in his limbs gradually subsided. Su Buling's breathing became much more steady. He huddled in the dark grass nest, hugged Zhongli Juju, and hesitated for a moment. "Miss Juju, actually, you have a really good temperament, but you just don't fit in with the world. It's quite to my liking." Zhongli Juju snorted lightly. "What? You still want to take your sister into the harem as a concubine? I am not an inexperienced child like Ning Qingyi. I was deceived by your too sweet words. Then how to cheat?" Zhongli Juju fell silent, loosened his hand a little, and wanted to turn around, but after hesitating for a while, he still hugged Su Buling to keep him warm, and said with a smile, "My man must be better than Ning Yu. I like a more powerful man, the kind with an 8-foot waist and 8-foot height." Su Buling frowned. "That's called a door panel." "What door panel?" "In our South Vietnam, handsome young men like you who look like a scholar are not popular. Women like that. They have endless strength when working during the day, and they can't use up all their strength at night." Su Buring blinked. "I am quite strong." "What's the point of being strong? That's all I have in body. If I'm not strong enough, we can't even get a wife over there. Not thick enough." Maybe Buletinling didn't like hearing this. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head slightly and kissed Zhongli Juju on the forehead. "Boo." The grass nest under the valley fell silent, and there was no sound. Zhongli Juju's arms were obviously stiff. He could feel his breathing rising and falling, but he couldn't see his expression. Su Buling showed a slight smile, and took advantage of the situation to lower his head and kiss again. This time, he kissed Zhongli Juju's red lips, which were stunned, and it felt sweet to the touch. "You dash." Zhongli Juju finally came back to his senses. His eyes in the dark night were full of astonishment, looking in the direction of Su Buling, without saying a word for a long time. Now that Su Buletinling had spoken, he no longer pretended to be a gentleman. He hugged her a little tighter, turned over despite the injury, and pressed Zhongli Juju down. He kissed her again while speaking, and ran her hands down her shoulders. Touching it, he reached into the skirt of his clothes. The four lips meet. Zhongli Juju didn't like wearing a belly band, and the delicate skin underneath her clothes gave her a little more warmth. Although Su Buling was a little powerless, it didn't matter if he tried his best at this time. The worst he could do was that Chaki was injured internally and would have to lie down for half a month at most. Su Buling took advantage of Zhonglijiju's daze, put his hands on the laces of her long skirt, and pulled it open a little. But before she could even open her mouth, she felt something pricked her waist. Hiss. Su Buletinling suddenly stopped talking and separated slightly. Ba, ba, ba. Like a frightened deer, Zhonglijiju rolled out of the hay nest, wiped her lips with her sleeves, and kept pouting. She seemed to have kicked the hay twice, but unfortunately she didn't hit anyone. Su Buling felt paralysis in his waist and lost consciousness. He quickly touched his waist and touched a silver needle. He quickly pulled it out and said with a frown. What the hell is this? Damn boy. A bastard, a pervert, shameless. Zhonglijiju didn't have the intention to answer Su Buling's question. The shame and anger in his words were not concealed. He grabbed the hay on the ground and threw it at Su Buling. If there was light in the wooden shed, one could see that Zhonglijiju's face was red right down to his neck, and his fox-like eyes were watery. Obviously he was greatly stimulated. Su Buling wanted to make up a few more excuses to appease him, but the numbness in his waist quickly spread to his whole body. He felt dizzy and fell into the grass. He looked in the direction of Zhonglijiju, and it was difficult for him to even move his eyelids. He could only open his mouth and speak vaguely. Dog Gugong, the thief is like a ghost of the sacred tree, the forward branch is wrong. Pervert. White-eyed wolf, I am kind enough to save you. The faint sound was completely covered by Zhonglijiju's shameful and anxious rebuke. It lasted for about half a minute before it slowly stopped. In the dim tree shed, Zhonglijiju stood in the corner, tightly grasping the hem of her skirt, and her breath was still unstable. After recovering a little, Zhonglijiju realized that Su Buling had been knocked down, but he did not faint. He snorted softly, got out of the wooden shed with a bit of anger, and walked out without looking back. But after taking a few steps, Zhonglijiju stopped again. In this cold winter, Su Buling would surely be frozen to death if she walked. How could this damn boy? Zhonglijiju wiped her lips with her sleeve and stood there in a dilemma, just like her mood these days. Last time outside Xiangshan Temple, after learning about the taboo relationship between Su Buling and Ning Yuhe, Zhonglijiju began to struggle. She really wanted to compete with Ning Yuhe, for the top 8, for fame, for apprentices, etc., but these were just to express her unwillingness to accept when she was young. Zhonglijiju was by no means a dissolute woman, she just regarded this as a kind of fun in life, and she had not yet lost her mind, just like she wanted to train Chu to compete with Ning Qingyi, but the comparison was just a side effect. She regarded Chu as her own daughter in her heart, and cherished this hard-won relationship even more, so if Chu didn't want to compete with her, she would not compete. If she wanted to save face, she would compete with Ning Yuhe for a man, which was obviously a crazy act. Zhonglijiju was not the kind of woman who would use herself. She had thought about it before, but if she really wanted to do it, she would give up the idea without hesitation. But just as being good to Chu and letting Chu compete with Ning Qingyi did not conflict, if she also liked a man and could compete with Ning Yuhe, she would definitely not refuse this good thing that had the best of both worlds. Like Su Buling or not. Zhonglijiju was hard to tell before, maybe she just admired Su Buling. But today, Su Buling traveled a long distance to ensure her safety because of an uncertain news, which really touched her. Maybe no one would not be moved. A friend who was not close to you, when he knew that you were in trouble but did not notice it, ran over to help you without any hesitation. As long as you are a wandering person, who would not be moved? Although the cause of Su Buling's current injury had nothing to do with her, if she hadn't trusted the information dealer and stepped into the trap, how could Su Buling come here alone? This injury was not for her. Zhonglijiju clutched her skirt, hesitated for a long time, looked back at the wooden shed, walked into the wooden shed again, and muttered bitterly. You dead boy, sister, I will settle accounts with you after your injury is healed. Su Buling lay in the haystack like a drunkard, opened his mouth. I'm frozen like a persimmon paper. Bah, stupid. Zhongli Jiju knew that the anesthetic slowed Su Buling's thinking, and ignored these unclear words. She reluctantly got into the haystack, leaned against Su Buling, and raised her hands to hug his chest again. Untie. Dash. Zhongli Jiju still had some annoyance in her eyes. Since Su Buling couldn't move, she took advantage of the situation and raised her hand to slap Su Buling on the face. Kiss you? Why don't you move? You were so excited just now. You think your sister is easy to bully, right? Next time I'll give you a hard one, so that you can only stare at women. Su Buling was hugged by Nuanuan's body, and the temperature rose again. His breathing became much more stable, and he mumbled a few dirty words. You are like, you can make ni unable to get up with your fingers. Zhongli Jiju couldn't hear clearly, and continued to speak coldly to herself. You are a pervert, I've seen that long ago. We have settled our friendship now, and I don't owe you anything. From now on, we will calculate by the hour. 1 hour's consultation fee is 1,000 taels. If you are 1 penny short, I will go back to Nanyu. Sang. Zhongli Jiju understood the sentence, and his eyes widened slightly. He let go of his hands and propped himself up, pretending to leave. Okay, I am a pervert, I will leave. Okay, you are talking nonsense. Humph, that's more like it. After several complaints, Zhongli Jiju's confusion in her heart calmed down a little. Maybe she was tired, so she lay down next to him again, closed her eyes and sulked. Come closer, it's cold. Do you believe that I can make you unable to open your mouth? Rustle. The cold wind blew, and the valley slowly became quiet until the wind and snow quietly stopped. The sky in the east was slightly cool, and there was no sound anymore. I stayed up late yesterday and went to bed in the morning. I guess I will finish the rest and update it tomorrow daytime. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 500. It was dawn, and the wooden shed was covered with thick snow. The shivering little sparrow burrowed into the gap between the two people hugging each other, slept with its little head tucked in, and occasionally moved its little wings. The numbness on his body gradually faded, and he felt a little itchy on his neck, and Su Buling woke up from his doze. Zhongli Jiju was still hugging him, and her tender face was slightly buried because of the extremely cold winter weather. Her eyes were closed, and her long eyelashes did not move at all. I don't know if she was concentrating or sleeping. They were very close to each other, and the little sparrow huddled between their chests. The scene looked like two people hugging each other to protect a little sparrow. As Su Buling moved, Zhongli Jiju immediately opened her eyes. When their eyes met, she calmed down a little, then raised her hand and gently pushed Su Buling's chest, turned over and sat up from the haystack. Zhongli Jiju patted the grass leaves on her collar, but saw a star-like palm print on the collar of her blue and white skirt. It should be left by Su Buling's sturdy hands when he touched the hay and rubbed her. Zhongli Jiju's breathing became heavier, as if she was brewing words. Su Buling turned over and sat up, rubbing his shoulders and chest that were a little painful, with a gentle and elegant expression, and spoke softly. Miss Jiju, I was injured and dizzy last night, and I don't know why, I'm really presumptuous. Bah! Zhongli Jiju was so angry that she shook her hair and turned back, her fox-like eyes full of dissatisfaction of do you think I'm stupid? However, no matter how open-minded a woman is, if she is taken advantage of by a man, what can she do if she can't do anything about it? Zhongli Jiju obviously didn't want to talk about what happened last night. After staring at Su Buling for a while, she stood up by supporting herself on the ground and patted the grass leaves on her skirt. Get up quickly. I haven't eaten for a day and I still have to serve you. I'm starving. Su Buling smiled kindly and stood up by patting the ground with his palm. He was still naked, and the wounds on his body were bandaged by the cloth strips on the hem of his skirt. Both of them looked a little embarrassed. Zhongli Jiju got out of the wooden shed and glanced around. The wild mountains and ridges were buried in snow. Even wild fruits could not be found, let alone human habitation. Zhongli Jiju let the little sparrow go, walked out of the snow ridge with 1 foot deep and 1 foot shallow. After walking a few steps, she looked back and saw Su Buling following behind. His steps were a little floating, probably because he had consumed too much energy and had not replenished his physical strength. Zhongli Jiju had a headache and felt that she shouldn't have chased after him. Not only was he taken advantage of, but Su Buling was injured in order to help her, so he couldn't just ignore it. She hesitated, but still walked back, just like last night, holding Su Buling's arm with her shoulder, and scolded him. "Su Buling, I found that there is something wrong with you. In the martial arts world, it is important to help friends in need without asking for anything in return. You came to help me regardless of anything, and I remembered your kindness, and I didn't care about the details to save you. But in the end, you took the opportunity to make a move, so that I couldn't scold you or thank you. You are called repaying kindness with enmity, you know? If you do this kind of thing in the martial arts world, you will definitely be called a scum of the martial arts world." Su Buling exhaled white mist in the air, leaned on Zhongli Jiju's shoulder, and smiled helplessly. "I said that I was in a daze last night. No one is perfect. You." Seeing that Su Buling refused to admit his fault and started to pretend to be a gentleman, Zhongli Jiju had nothing to say, snorted lightly, and didn't mention it anymore. Following the clear and transparent water bay of Yangkai River, the two of them supported each other and walked more than 2 miles of mountain road to the market beside Longtan. The stone archway, which was built in an unknown dynasty, had one of its 4 stone pillars broken and collapsed in the middle, with stones scattered on the ground. The county magistrates in the surrounding areas heard the news and brought the constables and coroners to Longtan Market to carry the body out of Tinquan Tower and cover it with white cloth. However, because the area around Shentangyu was the territory of Yangkai Villa, it was not easy to deal with it, and they all waited for the people from Yangkai Villa to come and collect the body. The owner and the second in command of Yangkai Villa died, and it was heard that a more terrifying fight broke out afterwards. Obviously, they were scared, and the whole villa became a turtle, and no one has come forward until now. The wandering Jianghu heard the news and some people came to watch the excitement, but yesterday's incident was just a few shop assistants hiding behind the door and taking a few glances. It was not clear who the 3 people who fought were. For a while, there were many different opinions and rumors. The dragon-patterned lance and the Minghong sword stuck in the wall were still in their original positions, and no one dared to move. The 2 horses ran into a shop stable to wait for their owner to return. The shop assistants were afraid of offending people, so they didn't dare to make a fuss and fed them hay like serving a master. After Su Buling came to the market, he took some silver from the horse and asked the assistant to find food and clothes. The shop assistant saw Su Buling's skills through the crack of the door yesterday, so he didn't dare to say a word and went to find them honestly. Zhongli Jiju drank a cup of pre-rain Longjing when he arrived at Shentangyu yesterday. He was also hungry and weak, and didn't talk to Su Buling. He watched the excitement outside and ate by himself. Su Buling consumed a lot of energy. He ate and rested for a while before he recovered. With his extraordinary skills, he took back the weapons when no one was paying attention, climbed on the horse and continued on his journey. Zhongli Jiju sat sideways on the big red horse and left Shentang Valley with Su Buling, but did not go in the direction of Huangkou town, but took the same path they came from, heading for Fanyang County. Su Buling was not surprised by this, because in the martial arts world, faith and loyalty are important, and revenge is the only way to pay back blood debts. The news dealers in the Jianghu are in a neutral position, they do things for money, they don't talk about personal relationships and don't make enemies. Only by relying on this iron rule can they win the trust of the Jianghu people in the world and be willing to pay money to trade with them. If Yankai Villa spent money to buy Zhongli Jiju's whereabouts, and Lu Wu sold it to Yankai Villa, this would be reasonable in the Jianghu. It can only blame Zhongli Jiju for accidentally exposing her whereabouts and not paying hush money. But Zhongli Jiju paid money to buy news from Lu Wu, and Lu Wu took the money and she became a guest. He took advantage of the guest's trust and led the guest to the enemy's territory, which violated the taboo in the Jianghu. If Su Buling hadn't come yesterday, Zhongli Jiju would have stepped into the encirclement of Yankai Villa. Even if she could escape with the dragon locking goo, wasting a bottle of priceless dragon locking goo would be a huge loss. If she didn't escape, it would be a big loss. Even if Su Buling came, it would have triggered the bloody battle with Chen Daizai. The injuries on Su Buling's body had to be counted as a part of the information dealer's responsibility, and it was impossible for him to forget it. Fanyang County City is not close to Shentangyu, and it will take at least tomorrow to arrive. The two of them rode at full speed and arrived in Xianghe County at dusk. They found an inn in the county town and stayed there. They had a good rest for a night and set off again at dawn. Su Buling fought all day, froze all night, and took a cold shower. The last time he felt so uncomfortable was when he fled from the Wei River to Chang'an. When he arrived at the inn, he asked the waiter to boil hot water, filled the bathtub with water, and soaked in the hot water, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. He was stabbed several times, but they all avoided the vital parts. With the top-level medicine prepared by Zhongli Jiju himself, the wounds are now scabby and there is still a tingling sensation, but it is no longer serious. There were some noisy voices outside the inn. It was getting dark. Su Buling sat in a steaming wooden barrel, looking at the wounds on his body, frowning and reviewing yesterday's battle. In Su Buling's memory, there were many records of fighting with others, but 99% of them were crushing and bullying. There were only 3 truly challenging fights. The consequence was the same as if a rich man could solve a problem with money. He was born with dragon tendons, tiger bones and unicorn strength. When he met an opponent, he could overcome 10 skills with 1 force and would not think so many twists and turns. The habit he developed since childhood made him study and practice martial arts moves that were extremely domineering, such as Bajikwan, Iron Wire Fist, Liu He Gun, etc., and he did not have much experience in winning by skills. With his talent, he could defeat most people with his hard work, but once he met a small number of masters who practiced skills to the extreme, there would be obvious problems. First, it was the Ghost Queen. The Ghost Queen herself was not very skilled in martial arts, but she relied on the Kimandunjia, hidden weapons, and other cooperation to improve her assassination ability to the extreme. If it weren't for his sharp 6 senses, he would probably suffer at the hands of the Ghost Queen. Xuechenzi, like him, took the path of dominance, and the difference in strength between them was relatively small. Xuechenzi couldn't beat him in a head-on fight, but his rich combat experience and skills in breaking and dismantling moves made it impossible for him to kill him in a short time. After meeting Chen Daizai, the result was obvious. Chen Daizai's internal martial arts were superb, and his fighting skills almost took him away. If he hadn't been too conceited and chose to fight head-on, he might not have been able to hit Chen Daizai with the Iron Mountain. This feeling is like a cannon shooting at a mosquito. It's not that you can't hit it, but that you can't hit it. It's obvious that 3 punches can kill Chen Daizai, but he doesn't put any effort into it. He can only take advantage of it by using risky moves to exchange injuries for injuries. The price is too high. At present, it seems that just external training of muscles, bones and skin has reached a bottleneck, and we need to study internal training of breath. Su Buling sat in the bathtub and pondered for a while, recalling the Wudang Danshan Qi circulation method in his memory, and carefully regulating his internal breath. Being able to fight with top warriors, as long as you are not dead, you will definitely benefit a lot. Although I was beaten, I also learned a lot from Chendaizai. Su Buling recalled the details of yesterday's battle, and when he was in a state of ecstasy, the door suddenly rang. Dong dong.